I am really happy to be here to discuss media and government, because this is the first time I've been called to address a subject in front of a group of people like you other than media and campaigns. But the bad news is I really do think that the relationship between media and government is pretty much the same as the relationship between media and campaigns. We've long become used to the idea of a permanent campaign as it applies to anyone holding elective office. I was a little surprised to learn when I was studying up for this that actually the term permanent campaign comes from a Pat Cadell memo to Jimmy Carter. So obviously it worked. I probably don't need to tell you what the permanent campaign is, but I will. It describes the constant search or creation of public or constituent approval by already elected officials. Cadell recognized it would mean favoring short-term gimmicks over long-term policies, and that's still true. What's changed, and it's changed because the media has changed, is the definition of short-term and long-term. Cadell defined short-term as a promise or idea that would entrance voters for maybe a month or two. A few years later, a decade later, Sidney Blumenthal not only changed the target of a short-term promise from voters to the media and getting to voters through the media, but he termed short-term as winning the day. Today in Washington, we hear people talk regularly about, although with some irony, winning the morning. Although it's come full circle in a way because the voters and the media are largely one thing. Political scientists have proposed that this cycling has eroded a loyalty to both parties and ideology. Campaigns used to revitalize a party. They used to sort of renew the relationship that people had with their party and with their government. And well, that doesn't happen when you have a permanent campaign. It actually sort of sours that relationship. And one political scientist put it this way, and I kind of love this phrasing, so I'm going to quote directly. The linkages between rulers and the ruled become ever hazier, ever more problematic. Put another way, by promising and cajoling the electorate, politicians have spoiled it, almost like you'd spoil a child, though it's true that these children, these voters, are not especially well treated. They're rhetorically spoiled, and they developed a tolerance for the sort of heady promises of campaigns, and they can't let that go when it's not a campaign season. There's a poll out today that I think illustrates this point. All of you probably saw it. It's Bloomberg. Republicans prove unpopular with voters against Obama in poll. It's not surprising if you've been following the news, but it shows that no party really dominates in terms of favorability and unfavorability. And this is dramatically different than other midterm elections where there's been at least like a 7 to 10 point, and in 2006, there's more like a 15-point difference between the two parties. And now, again, none of these numbers are a surprise. And the White House often refers to this as a tough environment, and they're talking mainly about the economy, obviously. But I think the problem is also the media. And the way it's structured. The cycles have gotten even faster since 2006. And what does that mean to you? The permanent campaign now applies to agencies and policies and institutes and maybe even ideologies as much as it applies to elected officials. Now, this, of course, is as old as ribbon cutting and dedicating things. But what's different is the speed and the cycle and the constant promise and persuasion. This project is brought to you by, is probably not enough. The fact that 90% of eligible Americans will get health care is not enough to sell people on health care, the Health Care Reform Act. If I can quote a friend of mine who's a staffer, this needs to go viral. The Tea Party sort of has a native understanding of this. While they do rail against Obama personally, they also attack institutions and policies with almost an idiot savant-like specificity, although with a merely idiot-like basis in truth. And here's where the viral comes into play. When you sort of pan back and consider the bigger picture for our governing institutions, you get a kind of surreal sense of the status quo and how it shifted. Democrats passed health care this spring with the expectation that the public sentiment would actually grow in favor of it when they got what was promised in the health care bill. Perhaps because the media would be reporting on these good things and provisions that were coming true because of the health care bill. But instead, it's even more unpopular. Democratic candidates are running away from what they privately concede the most significant achievement in decades. And sure enough, they're probably going to lose their majority. Democrats themselves admit this. And this is largely on the basis of actually accomplishing a long-term, far-reaching policy goal. The legacy media has followed the deliberate distortions of this policy, quoting not politicians or policy wonks about it, but rather the new media, the voters, the Twitterers, the Tea Partiers. And they've normalized the idea of death panels and the creeping socialism of the Obama administration. And those are now the themes of the permanent campaign, determined largely by the roots. And they're also what drives page views, what drives cable news ratings. They also drive the desire to win the morning, win the midday, and win the cocktail hour. That's my favorite. Truth is not as important as slogans, and this has come to be true for networks as well. Fox's Fair and Balanced, MSNBC's truly bizarre lean forward. They drive the coverage, not the actual news itself driving it. And no one participating in the campaign can afford to let their guard down and get on with the business of actually governing. It's hard not to see a not-so-distant future when the Palin administration's Facebook czar denounces the very idea of government, and the cable pundits tremble in fear over the idea that they might be next. There are many things to call that state of affairs, but the phrase healthy democracy doesn't leap to mind.